But he's the one that wrote in his commentary this, mustering up all the faith behind their prayers, they said, "You're out of your mind." Okay, let's jump in. So, the March of the New Covenant. By the way, hello everybody online. Thank you for joining us there. The March of the New Covenant continues in response to the prophetic command of Christ. Peter, bearing the keys to the kingdom, has now brought the Holy Spirit down onto the Jews. He has also brought it down on the Samaritans, reuniting the divided kingdom, the southern Jews with the northern Samaritans. And now we've had the Gentile Pentecost as well. So Peter's job is just about done. He's almost off stage, but not quite yet, because he will feature in tonight. As I keep reminding everybody, all this going on has not been without trouble and strife. Most of it external, people, Jewish religious leaders, etc. And we're going to see even now Romans tonight, hassling, but also from within. Big questions about how do we do this? Who should we eat with? Blah, blah, blah. How does it work? Now, last week, chapter 11, we all went bankrupt. I thought of that for some reason. Anyways, did anybody get that chapter? We filed chapter 11. All right, whatever. Yeah. Oh, wow. You're right. Chapter 11 was interesting. It was the response of the church to the news of the Gentile Pentecost. So if we go back to chapter 10, Peter has his incident. Oh, that's a wrong word for it. It's not an incident. His encounter, his appointment with Cornelius, the Roman centurion, right? Miraculously, he has the vision of the sheep. God tells him, there's guys coming, I want you to go with them. He goes with them. They're like, we had this vision too. We've been waiting. He shares the gospel. The Gentiles receive the Holy Spirit. Everybody goes off or whatever. And then chapter 11 is basically the guys up in Jerusalem calling Peter up there and saying, and it's kind of comical, remember? We heard you were eating with Gentiles, which is kind of comical when you think about what actually happened. And they're more concerned about the fact they were eating with them. And so Peter, as I said last week, he doesn't even try to argue the theology of the Old Testament or blah, blah, blah. He just tells the story. Here's what happened. About noon, I was on the roof, right? And then I had a vision and a sheet. And he walks him through the whole thing, including the 3-day trip up to Caesarea, the Gentiles, everything, yeah. In fact, I wrote in my notes, his response was, I was doing more than eating with him, right? It went way off, right? So he tells the story. Now, the church leader's response, in my own words, I wrote as quote-unquote tentative. And the reason I say that is because, they're kind of cool with it, So when they heard this, they had no further objections and they praised God. So then, God has granted even the Gentiles repentance unto life. But we know that they're gonna create some issues later on. And I happen to know that. That's why I wrote they're kind of tentatively okay with it. Now, by the way, when I thought of that and I wrote that down today, I kind of saw an irony that I've kind of missed before. And Lorraine, I thought you specifically might appreciate this irony. Because myself, I've had the privilege to lead 2 different Jewish people to Christ, right? And in retrospect, when I look back on it, what I realized is what it felt like to me was these people outside the kingdom who I'm ushering into, and I want to explain to them all the new things, right, about it, right? But do you realize the first evangelists were Jews, right? Who were, does that make sense? We're welcoming in, I think we got it. Thank you. That was quick. Who are welcoming Gentiles into the kingdom. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. But now it's all switched all these years later. But originally, it was these Jewish believers going, so we can welcome these guys into our thing, right? And look, 2,000 years later, it feels just the opposite. Anyways, I kind of thought about that today. But it was exactly how those early Jews must have felt. Like, okay, well, come on in, but we have to show you how things work, right? Okay. So, now, by the way, the second part of last week's teaching was the foundation of the first Gentile... Oh, I'm getting behind. There is a clock up here. I just realized it's just tiny compared to the other one. All right. But that's because like it appeared up there. Thank you, Lord. It was the foundation of the first Gentile church of earth. That was my little joke, yeah? You know how you have the first Baptist, church or blah, blah, blah? It's like the first Gentile church on the planet, basically, in Antioch. And it's a really cool story because you have these kind of what I wrote as rogue Jewish believers who are just out there, man, giving the gospel. They were probably at Pentecost, and now it was almost as if they came up with this idea on their own. Why don't we try sharing with the Gentiles and see what happens? They do this in Antioch, and sure enough, boom, right? So the Jerusalem church sends Barnabas guys down there to check it out. What a perfect guy, the son of encouragement, right? Down there to see what's going on. He's like super stoked, and he's like, keep doing what you're doing, but I'll be right back. And what does he do? He goes 100 miles. Why? He goes to find Saul, who has been missing in action for anywhere from 6 to 13 years, depending on your theology. Argue amongst yourselves. Okay. And but he's been studying, I believe, this is just me believing this, he's been studying the Old Testament, getting together his theology all together about why Christ completely fulfills all the prophecies of the Old Testament. He's seeing Christ and now he realizes, this is why God has chosen me to be an instrument to the Gentiles. Remember, that was the command he got from God 6 to 13 years earlier, right? You will be my chosen instrument to the Gentiles. And Paul is like rearing and ready to go. And then Barnabas showed up. And he's walked or ridden on a donkey, we don't know, 100 miles to get there. And he gets there, and we can only imagine what he said, but I'm going to guess it went like this. You got to come see what's happening in Antioch, because I know you have been the chosen instrument for the Gentiles, and the Gentiles are going off. And Paul just, let me get my stuff. Let me grab my toothbrush, and boom, 100 miles, and he goes back, and they serve in Antioch for a year. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so now that sets us up for where we are tonight. Now the stage is set for the Gentile revival. Except one thing, when I wrote that word revival, I'm like, I think that's the wrong word to use. Revival. Which revival seems like more of a return to. But for the Gentiles, this is the first time. Like if we were going to have a revival on the island, it would be, let's return to the Lord, right? By the way, do you know what the technical meaning? I looked up the etymology today of the word revival. To live again. Isn't that interesting, to live again? Anyways, okay. But this movement, this big circus that's going to go out to explode at the Gentile word is going to be led by Saul, who's not quite Paul yet. But first, back to Peter. So we'll pick it up next week with the rest. And now we're going to go back to Peter. And I think it's after tonight. Yep, this is the last story, the real story of Peter. He's going to show up real briefly at the Council of Jerusalem in a few chapters. But tonight is sort of the last Peter story that we have, basically, in the book of Acts. Okay? So we're going to pick it up in chapter 12, verse 1. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. Let's pause. Just want to tell you which King Herod this is, because there's a bunch. There was King Herod the original, King Herod the builder, the first King Herod. He's the one who built the Temple Mount that still stands today, the big Herodian temple, the big monstrosity, the big one. He was the builder. He also, by the way, built Caesarea, where a lot of this takes place, including that's where Cornelius was. He built Caesarea. It was his son from his third wife, that was Herod, I think Antipas, I might have got that wrong. It's one of the Herods. Yeah, I think it was Herod Antipas. And Antipas was the one who is famous because when he heard, he's the one that killed all the babies, right? And wait, do I have that right? Or is he the one that Jesus appeared before? I thought I had it all dialed and I thought I had it memorized. Now I'm not so sure. In any case, King Agrippa, that's the one from tonight, right? This is King Herod Agrippa, is actually the grandson of the first King Herod. So we have King Herod the 1, King Herod the 2, and this is like now the grandson who was actually descendant of his first wife. Okay, if you're confused, go with it then. Anyways, but this is an interesting story. When he was a child, the one we're talking about tonight, he was sent to Rome, where he had a very good fortune to grow up with and become childhood chums with two guys by the name, one was named Gaius and one was Claudius. Those names sound familiar. Both those guys became the emperor of Rome at different times. And both of those guys helped King Herod Agrippa get more and more and more powerful. In fact, he ended up with more geographical territory than even King Herod the Great, the original one, did. And by the way, the Jews loved him. And so the reason why that's important is that is perhaps why he's persecuting the new church to tend favor. In fact, we're going to see what happens here in verse 2. Let's just do verse 2. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Now, just so you know who this is the brother, James, the brother of John, the apostle, not the brother of Jesus. There's two Jameses. One is the apostle James, the brother of John. This is not James, Jesus' brother. Are you confused yet? Jesus' brother James is the head of the church in Jerusalem. He's the one who wrote the book of James. And he's the one, you can always remember him because they called him, anybody remember? Old Camel Knees. Because he was considered such a righteous man. He prayed all the time, and he prayed so long that he got bumps on his knees. He had knees that looked like camels. That's Jesus' brother James. This is James, brother of John, who is now the first apostle to be martyred. Okay? And I thought you might find this interesting, but back in Mark chapter 10 and verse 38, I think it is, James and his brother John are the ones that go to Jesus and go, hey man, when you come into your kingdom, can we sit at your right hand? Remember that? Yeah, they were kind of mama's boys. They asked their mom, can we go talk to him? You know, they go talk to Jesus. No, anyway. But this is the reply Jesus says, and it's really interesting in the light of what we just read. Jesus says this to both James and John. Oh, you don't know what you are asking. Jesus said, can you drink the cup I drink? Jesus drank the cup of wrath, yeah? Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? And you know what they say? Oh, we can. And Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with, but to sit at my right hand or the left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those whom they've been prepared. So some people think that was a prediction of the fact that they would be martyred as well for the faith. So here's what happens in verse 3. When Herod saw that this pleased the Jews, see, they loved him, he proceeded to seize Peter also. And this happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Herod is gaining in popularity. So because of abusing the Christians. So during the Passover season, he hopes to please a lot of Jews because remember, Jews would be coming from all over, right? They're all going to be coming and gathering, and Herod can be their big hero by, executing the most major apostle. Remember, Peter is the lead apostle, okay? And what a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Publicity. What is help me out? PR, yeah. What a big PR moment this can be for Herod, okay? By the way, don't miss the irony that this is happening during the festival of the unleavened bread, which was to commemorate their freedom from captivity. And what's Peter doing? He's going around setting people free from their sins, and he's about to get in prison. And plot spoiler, you know what happens next. Okay, so anyways, so the festival of unleavened bread would last 7 days. So Herod's intent was to arrest him, and at the end of the 7 days, right before Passover, then he'd have him executed. By the way, I went back to read this. I'm pretty sure I got it right. I know it can be kind of confusing, but as the best I could tell, this is the 3rd time Peter has been arrested. Okay? How many times does Peter need to learn things? There's that number again. Every time the sheet comes down 3 times, the 3 times denial, it's 3, 3, 3, always 3. 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? With Peter and the number 3, boom. Now the first time, they were just let go by the powers that be. Remember, they let him go and they said, okay, we're going to let you go, but stop talking about Jesus. And what did they do? They went straight to the temple and started preaching Christ, right? The next time they got arrested was a miraculous release. They were in there, a few of them. This time, Herod doesn't want to take any chances, so he puts them in supermax. Right? How many guards do you count? 16 guards. That ought to do it, right? Okay, so most people reckon that this was a rotating cast of characters where you would have 2 souls. Well, you're going to read in a second that he had 2 will be chained to him and 2 will be outside the prison door, right? So you got a total of 4 watching him at all times. So where do we? We pick up the story in.
He's talking to all 16.
All 16. Yeah. He's sharing. Imagine over the course of 7 days. Oh, I bet all 16 got saved. Can you imagine the testimony when he disappears too? Because he's probably been telling them, you think these are chains? You don't know. You got sin in your life? You want to talk about chains? Yeah, I don't know. Who knows what he knew? Who knows what he was preaching? Actually, if we know from previous statements, he's going, let me tell you about the Old Testament. Got some time? Oh, yeah, you do. And you know what? Those guys are probably so bored, they were probably like, tell us more, man. You know, like what else are they going to do? Talk story, brother. Okay, so verse 5. Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. Now, I looked up that word earnestly. It's kind of interesting. Ektamos. It's a medical term, which means to stretch a muscle to its limit. Like, this is praying, stretching yourself out in prayer. In other words, it's like praying with your greatest effort. You want to hear something cool? And I looked it up to make sure. There is only one other time in Scripture where this word is used. Anybody want to take a guess, or do you know already? Go ahead, Tom.
Garden of Gethsemane.
Good for Tom, gold star. What were you, like an elder pastor? Oh, yeah, you were. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus himself prays earnestly. And this is the next and only other time it's used in the Bible, yeah? Now, by the way, I want to just pause here for a second. Do you know, like this happened a few weeks ago. I hope you all got the, I sent out, if you're not on the prayer chain, I hope you get on the prayer chain. Just see Kelly. I sent out a prayer request. I'm going to try to do this without getting misty. That the church would pray for Kayla Santos, who precious 16, almost 17-year-old girl. She was the, the Mayday Queen when Cozy, my son, was the Mayday King. Precious family that's been attending here since then. It's kind of a cool story, but they started coming to church because of that, the Mayday Queen and King thing, and I talked to them and they started coming to church. That's going back 7-8 years now, a long time now, yeah. They were 12, about 6 years, 10, about 6-7 years now, yeah. She had a brain tumor. And they did surgery last Wednesday. I asked the whole church to pray, and full, complete recovery. Like, she's completely healed. Now, the reason I say that is because, you know, when we ask the church to pray, we pray earnestly, things happen. Things happen. Okay, so here's where it gets kind of fun. Verses 6 through 10. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean they were going to put him on trial. What does it really mean? Execute him. We already know what the outcome is, right? Peter was doing what? Sleeping. That's an interesting little factoid. Don't you just kind of go, wait, he's doing what? The night before his execution? What? Between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Quick, get up. And the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, put on your clothes and sandals. And Peter did so. Wrap your cloak around you and follow me, the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing. He had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Let's just pause for a second right there. Okay. Now, by the way, you could see why he might have thought he was having a vision, right? Because he just had this vision of the sheet coming down 3 times, which was sort of, I don't know how to explain a vision, maybe like a hallucination or just a dream-like trance. And he's thinking, he's dreaming. Now, by the way, to kind of give you an idea of how deep a sleep he was in, I looked it up. That word, when it says he struck Peter on the side, that's quite a blow. Like, it's not like a tap on the shoulder. It's apparently like kind of giving somebody a swift kick in the you-know-what, right? Like a little bit of a boom. Like, so that tells us something interesting. Peter wasn't just asleep. He was snoozing. Now, I don't know if we could draw too much out of the fact that he's sleeping that deeply the night before he's executed. But I did think of this verse in Peter, so I wrote it down. 1 Peter 5:7, when Peter says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. I don't know. Was Peter just that relaxed? I don't know. But anyways, he was sound asleep. Now, it looked like everybody was really sound asleep from what happens. So this angel appears, and even Peter's like not sure what's going on. And it does kind of have a dream-like sequence to it, right? Where get up, he's dressing, but the guards, all 4 of them, at least 4, are passed out. It's a little bit like the resurrection scene, isn't it? The sleeping soldiers. Yeah? Okay, we don't exactly know. Maybe we might even pause right here. I just want to ask a question just to cause a discussion. I'm not going to look for an answer. But isn't it interesting that Peter's rescued, but not James? Right? And did they pray as fervently for James? We don't know. But I find it interesting that I think if you look back, God in his sovereignty is like, some are going to live a little longer than others, and I have things for people to do. The only thing I can guess is that God's like, nope, not done with Peter yet. This is different. Well, it gets different. Maybe I'll save this, but this is a different escape story than the one we shared on Sunday. It works differently. And so one guy gets fully martyred, one fully escapes, one, Paul, gets set free but doesn't leave. But everybody's paying attention to what God's doing and doing what the Spirit is telling them to do. And God is orchestrating all this. Does anybody have a question or comment before we move on? Yes, sir. We've already lost James. We can't lose Peter. Let's pray. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And you know what's really cool if you think about it from the big picture? And isn't prayer a mystery? But whether they pray fervently or not, if it's God's will, he's going to get released. And yet, when you pray, as you're probably all aware, I hope you all have prayed enough to know, you're in it, aren't you? You're involved in it. It's a mysterious thing that God does, that he brings you into the situation because of your prayer. And so they share in the victory of the release of Peter in some interesting way, which is why, I'll be honest, when I heard Kayla was okay, I burst into tears. Surprise, surprise, whatever, yeah. But I dropped to my knees and prayed. Said, thank you. All right, let's move. Verse 11. So then Peter came to himself. And now imagine this. If you've been are they in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? Where are they anyways? Are they in Caesarea? It doesn't even say. I think they're up in Jerusalem. I'm going to guess, because later on they go down. Oh yeah, then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea. Okay, so they're up in Jerusalem right now. But imagine he's in a Jerusalem street right now, middle of the night. And what does it say? He comes to himself. Wow. Like, comes out of a trance. And he's like, whoa, now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating. And what were the Jews anticipating? His death, right? Yeah. Which I just came across this verse from Job. God thwarts the plans of the crafty so that their hands achieve no success. Yeah, he's just not going to have it. Okay, now this is where it gets kind of fun. This is actually a really fun part of the story, and it's just really neat. It's got human nature in it, and it's celebratory. Verse 12. Let's read to 17. When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter's at the door." "You're out of your mind," the faithful, praying earnestly people told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel," said the fervently praying people. But Peter kept on knocking. "It's me, Dave. It's me, Peter, yeah?" And when they, I know that those of you laugh, I know where you've been. And when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. And I think they got kind of loud because Peter motioned with his hand, "Shh," for them to be quiet. And he described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the brothers about this." And then he left for another place. Now, this is really interesting. So, Peter, in the dark of the night on a quiet, deserted Jerusalem street, he goes to Mary and John Mark's house. Now, John Mark is likely the youngster who was at the garden that left his robe behind. Remember, went running away when the soldiers tried to seize him? He's also the author of the book of Mark, which was likely dictated to him by Peter, right? He was also the cousin of Barnabas. Rhoda, who of course was Mary Tyler Mower's good friend. Just love it. How many Rhodas do you know? I only know two. The one who had her own TV show and this one, right? Okay. So this is kind of cute and comical, but in her excitement, she runs without even letting Peter in, and Peter's still standing outside, obviously feeling somewhat in danger. One of the commentators I read today wrote, "How exquisite is this touch of human nature?" It's a really cute scene. In her excitement, she hears Peter's voice and is so excited she runs to go tell everybody, Which, by the way, there's a little bit of that kind of Resurrection Sunday vibe to it, right? In the hurry to go tell people, right? And then, of course, even John MacArthur had to try to be funny, which if you've ever listened to John MacArthur CDs, it happens about once every 10 years. But he's the one that wrote in his commentary this, "Mustering up all the faith behind their prayers, they said, 'You're out of your mind.'" And John MacArthur went, "You're so funny, John." Anyways, meanwhile, Peter's still outside going, "Come on," whatever. It's just a really cute story. I just love it. It really shows the humanity behind it. It gives ballast to these people, that they're real people. They're not what I call felt board characters. These are real people. Yeah, I can't wait till the Chosen series gets to the book of Acts. I can't wait to watch this scene, right? But notice the excitement when they see him. They must sort of shush, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, and get them inside because it's not safe. Now, also notice that he says, "Go tell James," right? This is James, not the one, obviously, who's just been executed, but this is James, the brother of Jesus, who is clearly the leader of the Jerusalem church and will be until his death. But we can't forget what an important mission this is for James to be up in the temple in Jerusalem, right, taking the responsibility to witness to Jews, right? And this is going to be a major victory for the Christians, that the word needs to go out, that they're trying to persecute Christians, but it's not always going to happen, particularly when the details get out about how miraculous this escape is. Okay, so this is interesting. So why Peter sort of splits town, right? But he doesn't stay put like Paul. I wanted to sort of briefly talk about the difference between this story about Peter and Paul's story from last Sunday. And I think, wait, I'm kind of getting lost in my notes here, yeah. Well, Paul wasn't facing execution, right? Paul had actually been sort of falsely accused for disturbing the peace, whereas Peter is clearly under the threat of persecution. So there are different scenarios, so that when Paul's chains drop off him, he's like, let's just stay tight. We're going to have some fun here, right? We're going to make the magistrates come down and escort us out of the jail. In Peter's case, they're going to kill him, right? If they catch him, they're going to kill him. So Peter doesn't go back to the temple. We know that because that's why he tells them, go tell James, because James, that's where James would be at the temple. Eventually Peter will be martyred, but God still has work for him to do. And however, as I mentioned earlier, for the most part, it's pretty much going to be the Paul show from here on out. Peter's going to kind of escape a little bit. Interestingly enough, in spite of what I just said, eventually he will come back to Jerusalem, but he can, because at that time Herod will be dead. How do I know? It's in the next couple of verses. It's the next part of the Bible study. But we're not quite there yet. Let's finish up with verses 18 and 19. I like this. This is kind of comical as well. Well, not really, I guess, not if you're a Roman soldier. But in the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what to... Imagine they wake up. What the? Right? You know? After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. Now you know why the jailer, right, in the Paul story, in the Philippi story, was ready to fall on the sword himself, right? Okay, an escaped prisoner was a really big deal. No small commotion. By the way, it does add authenticity to the story because this is exactly what would have happened. Okay, next we're gonna talk about the death of Herod. And we've got plenty of time, so if anybody has a question or a comment. Yes, Louis?
I'd like to believe that some of those soldiers actually were saved.
Yeah, and went straight to glory.
Right.
You know, I hadn't thought that, Louis. That's a great thought, and you know what? I am really inclined to believe that for a couple of reasons. They were sitting with one of the greatest apostles and evangelists of all time, for all that time, with the full gospel. They've seen his fearlessness, right? The Holy Spirit is clearly at work, and at work specifically with Roman soldier, Gentile, pagan Roman Gentile soldiers, right?
An angel that sounds like us?
That sounds... That is... Okay, so it's so funny. So just so you know, I kind of did some investigation about that, because apparently some people have made a really big deal. Does that mean everybody has their own personal angel? Now, that is a highly debated point. There's not a lot of scriptural evidence one way or the other. And I decided it really wasn't worth bringing up. But Steve, I had never thought that if you had your own angel, he can imitate your voice. Is that Steve? Or is that his angel speaking? I don't know, but that is really kind of comical. But it is kind of funny. Maybe it's just his angel. But even if it's his angel, should you not go see?
Yeah.
If it's his angel out there? I don't know. By the way, I have no idea. Does anybody have a timeline available to them? How many years past the resurrection are we? Are we years or are we months? Now, this next little interlude, it's just kind of interesting that it gets put in here. But let's just go ahead and read it. We'll start in verse 20. Let's read the first three verses. Then Herod, I guess we're starting from 19b, right? Then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there for a while. He had been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and now they joined together and sought an audience with him. Having secured the support of Blastus, boy, they just don't give names like that out anymore, yeah? A trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. Oh, let's keep reading. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a god. not of a man. And immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. Wow!
What if it's the same angel that struck me?
Maybe it's the same angel. Maybe it's Peter's angel. No. By the way, I always like to monkey around with that. When people are like, they think of angels as always being these kind of cute, cuddly, fuzzy, this one, yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this. Okay, Caesarea obviously was sort of the headquarters of the Roman garrison, and that's why Herod's there, because he's got a lot of protection there. But this is sort of a little, as one commentator put it, almost like an extra acts story. In other words, it's interesting because it doesn't really have anything to do with like the gospel going out to Gentiles. It doesn't involve really, it almost sounds like it's sort of, we just want to show the retribution or a way. However, it does serve the purpose to show how, persecution of the brothers and sisters was happening, right? But Sidon and Tyre, to give you some historical background, had somehow offended Herod Agrippa, and they needed to make amends because, as we saw from the story, he could shut off their food supply. In fact, we know for a fact he did. I'll get to that in a second, which, by the way, is sort of why they shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not of a man." Pardon my French, but they're kissing his butt, right? That's what they're doing, because he has choked off their food supply. We don't know from history how they offended King Herod, but we know that they did, and that they were there to sort of beg that he would release the food to them. And so when they're like, "Oh, he's like a god," they're just, they're just blowing smoke at him, all right? And so they bribe this guy, Blastus, first. And by the way, I really tried hard to find out what is the root Greek. How do you get the name Blastus? And I was really disappointed. I couldn't find anything. The Greek word is Blastus. Big deal. Whatever. Anyways, but here's what I want to point out is interesting, and it took a little while, but I found it because I'd heard that it existed. And I have the works of Josephus, the great Jewish historian, somewhere in my Bible software program, but it was like 18 volumes long. And when I couldn't figure out the search button on it. But I went looking other places and I found it, but I'm going to actually read to you the actual historical account from Josephus, who, by the way, he was a Jew who later on would become a traitor to the Jews. He would actually stand on the Mount of Olives, and I can remember it because it's, what do you call the little scooters, Vespas, with General Vespasian, who would later on go, by the way, to become the Emperor of all Rome. But Josephus stood on the Hill of Olives with General Vespasian at the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Remember in AD 70, what is it? 70, which, by the way, I've told you the horror story. If you ever read the actual account of what happened, that was a horrific, not just day, but period of months. Remember, they were something like crucifying 5,000 Jews a day because they ran out of wood to create more crosses. So they put them up on a cross, kill them with the spear, and put another one. It was just, when you talk about blood running in the streets, it really was. And Josephus was hanging out with and became the buddy of Vespasian, and that's how he sort of became not the official, but he became a very well-known Roman historian. And we have in our possession, not me personally, here at KCF, his entire works. So, without further ado, the account of King Agrippa's death as told by Flavius Josephus. Now, when Agrippa had reigned 3 years over all Judea, he came to the city of Caesarea. There he exhibited shows in honor of the emperor. And on the second day of the festival, Herod put on a garment made wholly of silver and of a truly wonderful contexture, and came into the theater early in the morning, at which time the silver of his garment was illuminated by the fresh reflection of the sun's rays upon it. It shone out after a surprising manner and was so resplendent as to spread a horror over those who looked intently upon him. At that moment, his flatterers, that would be the people of Sidon and Tyre, right, cried out that he was a god. And they added, "Be merciful to us, for although we have hitherto reverenced thee only as a man, yet shall we henceforth own thee as a superior to mortal nature." Upon this, the king did not rebuke them, nor reject their impious flattery. But as he presently afterward looked up, he saw an owl sitting on a certain rope over his head, and immediately understood that this bird was the messenger of ill tidings, as it had once been for the messenger of a good tidings to him, and he fell into a deepest sorrow. A severe pain also arose in his belly, and began in a most violent manner. And he therefore looked upon his friends and said, "I whom you call a god am commanded presently to depart this life, while providence thus reproves the lying words you just now said to me, and I who was by you called immortal, and immediately to be hurried away by death. But I am bound to accept what providence allots as it pleases God, for we have by no means lived ill, but in a splendid and happy manner." After he said this, his pain was become violent. Accordingly, he was carried into the palace, and the rumor went abroad that he would certainly die in a little time. But the multitude presently sat in sackcloth, and their wives and children after the law of their country, and besought God for the king's recovery. I wonder if they prayed fervently. All places were also full of mourning and lamentation. Now the king rested in a high chamber, and as he saw them below lying prostrate on the ground, he could not himself forbear weeping. And when he had been quite worn out by the pain in his belly for 5 days, he departed this life, being in the 54th year of his age, and in the 7th year of his reign. Flavius Josephus, Jus Antiquities, 19:343-350. I went and found some cool stuff about that. Consumed by worms is more of a description of suffering than actual death, right? We are told this more to see that he suffered. The term scolex, which is the word that we have in here, is a term for a tapeworm. And the description of death by this particular type of tapeworm is not pretty. I'm going to spare you all the details, but it's literally eaten from the inside out, and it forms a cyst. And what happens is the cyst bursts. And you go from just sort of having a large lump to extreme and excruciating pain. And it took 5 days. And interestingly enough, the other place that worm scolex is used in Scripture is when Jesus describes hell as a place where the worm never sleeps. So talk about hell on earth. Boom, that was Herod's death. At that point, Josephus reckons the government then went into the hands of other Roman administrators until the younger Agrippa takes over. And by the way, one of those little Bible things, the younger Agrippa will be the one who presides over Paul's trial that gets Paul sent to Rome. Dun, dun, dun. I'm kind of curious, and I don't know how you would ever know this or prove this, but how many years before the fall of the temple is this? Some time, right? I mean, aren't we at least 25 years out or so, at least? I don't know at what point Josephus becomes the great historian. My point is, I don't know how many years go by before he actually writes down this event. We don't have any proof that he was at the event. That we don't know if this is second or third or fourth hand of the event. It's just interesting because the reason I shared that with you is just because, when we were in the book of, for example, when you're in the book of Joshua and Judges, there's all this really wild stuff going on, right? Stuff that sort of sounds mythological, Samson ties the tails of, 500 foxes. Where do you find 500 foxes? You go to the fox store? But I've said this to you before, the farther you go back in history, the more blurry it gets. But when you start getting up to things like the Babylonian captivity, Well, we have lots of actual archaeological evidence. We have archaeological evidence of the Assyrians surrounding Jerusalem when Isaiah tells Hezekiah, God says don't surrender. And we have, I've seen it. It was in the British Royal Museum, proof that the Assyrians turned around and went home and did not sack Jerusalem even when they were at the gates, right? Okay, so we have proof of that. And now we have the actual, I mean, do you see where we're getting into? We're getting into the written history of man, and all this stuff is really going on. So it's pretty cool. Like, does that make sense? Yeah? That's the only reason I read all that. Let me read the last verse, because then we can actually begin the wrap up here, which is just the last two verses, which really aren't much. But the word of God continued to increase and spread. When Barnabas and Saul finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. I think you can probably tell that that is actually where chapter 13 is supposed to start. But you know, the chapters and verses are not inspired by God. So we'll probably actually start in verse 24 next week, because we're going to kick off the first missionary journey next week. Now, my notes for closing thoughts, I don't really have what I didn't think much really good applications for tonight. But does anybody have closing thoughts or comments? That's why I really enjoyed we sang this verse tonight. And the church will stand; she will endure. Like, no matter what, right? His will not be thwarted by any king or any kingdom. And our role in it is to give glory to God, right? That's it. And it's a witness to others. It gives glory to him, and it's an assurance of salvation when we give the glory where the glory is due. Yeah. Good word, Dave. Anybody else? We got about 2 minutes. You know what you made me think about too when you said that, Mike, too, is remember, it's being rescued from prison or not being rescued from prison seems to have, like, not its root or its base in, but the giant element around it is the job at hand. And so if you're being persecuted, knowing that you have a mission and a purpose enables you to undergo all kinds of horrific things if you know that you're going through these things for a purpose. And if the purpose is to give glory to God and to share the gospel, then you're going to march in that direction no matter what, which to your point, Lewis, means that you know Peter was sharing Christ because he didn't know if this would be the last opportunity he would have to share Christ. I think you might have all heard that World War II story that Rick told one time. It's kind of a horrific story about the Jews in the concentration camps who the Allied bombers came and they blew up some buildings inside the camp, and so the guards had them move all the rubble from one side of the camp to the other side of the camp. And I don't know how long it took, but it was a horrifically large job. They had to break it up into pieces and then physically carry. And of course, they're starving and freezing, and you know all the rest. And when they got it all finally over to the other side of the yard, the guards said, "Okay, now move it all back." And they, many of the Jews ran and threw themselves onto the electric fence, the barbed wire or whatever, because the story. By the way, I don't even know if that story true or not. You can blame Rick if it's not. But he's a World War II nut scholar. But the point behind the story is you can endure all kinds of horrible things when you have a purpose, when what you're doing has meaning. And so when I think about Peter and James and Saul in jail and anybody around the world right now being persecuted, and our role in our lives, right, which is manini suffering compared to that, but we don't know what the future will bring, and we don't know. Don't lose sight of our goal, which we are called evangelicals because we are, or remember, even the root word for Christians were those who tell about Christ, those who talk about Jesus. And that propels us because, like you said, Dave, my thing turned, but the word of God continued to increase, right? And if that's our mission, we can endure anything. Last word, Lewis, we got to stop. Sorry, I got to chuckle, but I know this is probably not true what I'm about to say, but do you ever wonder if God's up in heaven, and he's been allowing this guy to persecute and kill his people, and then he sees that, he's like, okay, we're done. He's done. Like, enough's enough. Just take this guy out. I don't know. I'm sure he had more of a plan than that, you know? I'm sure he did have more of a plan. I just picture God in heaven going, I've had enough of this guy. Gabriel, whatever, you know, or whoever, Owl, whatever. Let's pray. Father God, Lord, I thank you for these servants, Lord, that are all everybody we've read about in this story has gone to be with you. I mean, the believers that we've read about here. James, Rhoda, Mary, John, Mark, Peter, John, Lord, all of them are with you right now, in glory, in heaven, in splendor, God. Having, as Paul says to Timothy, having fought the good fight, Lord. Having put your gospel word and your gospel saving message ahead of everything else in their life. They were completely committed to you, God, and fearless in it. Father, I pray that as we gather here tonight on a Tuesday night, by the power of your Holy Spirit, Lord, you would embolden us, God, and just move us from whatever level we're at right now to the next level, or to 10 levels above, God. That in as even my brother Dave said, in a time where so many are scared and so many are worried about the future, oh man, can we ever have a great opportunity to share the hope of you, Lord? May we all be prepared at all times to give reason for the hope that is within us. And then when we speak the truth, may we do so in love. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. And everybody said amen.